The Economist magazine, it describes Gaza as, quote, a human rubbish heap. The leading UN official on Gaza describes it as, quote, a toxic dump. For the people of Israel, Gazans are vermin. They're garbage. They're human refuse.
You guys were the ones that insisted that we all have a perspective on October 7th. Then when we looked and we pierced that veil, we went, oh my goodness, how was I ever pro-Israel? And now you want us to shut up.
There's a problem here. A billionaire class of Jewish supremacists are now flagrantly using money as a blackmail weapon to silence not just criticism of Jews, but silence criticism of an ongoing genocide.
All right, you guys, I am super excited about this conversation. Where do I begin? I'll just begin with my personal experience. October 7th took place, and I remember immediately after there was sort of this peer pressure campaign to get everybody to make a statement about what had happened in Israel. And frankly, I was happy to make a statement about how tragic those events were, but I couldn't actually make a statement regarding why these events took place. I didn't know what had happened prior to that day. I didn't know the history of the modern state of Israel. And when I began what I would call an honest inquiry into the history of the modern state of Israel, I felt that I was basically in a pressure cooker. People that I thought were my friends were telling me not to pursue this route. I didn't comprehend what they meant when they said not to pursue this route. They were calling me names, saying that I was flirting with anti-Semitism by wanting to read books and speak to people that were on the opposite side of that issue. And I got into a lot of trouble, and I mean a lot of trouble, from people that I thought were my friends when I hosted the person who is now sitting across from me, Norm Finkelstein, on my previous show. And the things that he told me about Gaza were shocking. It was especially shocking because this wasn't from someone that they could easily describe as anti-Semitic, giving us history, which he's going to tell you about today. Very important discussion. And he's also an individual that I thought, quite strangely, none of the people who were peer pressuring me were willing to debate. If Norm Finkelstein is wrong, and he could be, why wouldn't the most prominent voices of the pro-Israel debate be willing to sit down with him and have that discussion? We're going to figure out why. Norm Finkelstein, welcome to my show. Actually, mine, totally owned by me. I can host you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show.
So just in case my audience has not been introduced to you, I would first just sort of like you to, and we're going to get to your books, which are amazing, to kind of tell them your backstory and your credentials and what happened despite the fact that you were so credentialed.
The backstory is there's a personal element and there is a professional element. The personal element is that I am the son of survivors of the Nazi Holocaust. Both my parents were in what was called the Warsaw Ghetto. The Warsaw Ghetto was repressed after an uprising in April 1943. There were about 20 to 30,000 survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and they were deported to Majdanek concentration camp. And both my father and my mother were deported to Majdanek. My mother ended up in 2 slave labor camps after Majdanek, and my father ended up in Auschwitz, and he was in the Auschwitz Death March. Every member of my family, apart from my mother and father, on both sides, everybody was exterminated. There were no aunts, there were no uncles, there were no grandparents, there was nothing. And my parents were, for reasons not worth going into now, they were decidedly on the left politically. And it had a very deep impact on me growing up. And in a way, even though I grew up in a lower middle class Jewish neighborhood, I never quite fit in because of my family background and a totally different mindset, I think, partially different mindset than my peers because of my parents' experience. In June 1982, we're fast forwarding, June 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon, and I got involved in the Israel-Palestine conflict. In my youth, it was mostly the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement. In 1982, it became Israel-Palestine. I ended up writing my doctoral dissertation at Princeton University on the theory of Zionism. And then in 1984, there was a kind of big national bestseller called From Time Immemorial, which claimed to reveal new aspects of the Israel-Palestine conflict that proved Israel was in the right and the Palestinians were in the wrong. I was still a graduate student at the time, and I demonstrated that this book, which had the endorsement of the who's who of the Jewish intellectual community back then, people like Barbara Tuchman, who you wouldn't know, Saul Bellow, the novelist, they all endorsed the book. And I am widely credited with the one exposing that it was a hoax. And from there on in, I would say, after having demonstrated that this kind of humble graduate student proving that all the luminaries were either promoting a threadbare hoax. From there on in, I would say I encountered difficulties in my professional life.
Amazing. So despite, and you did achieve your PhD.
Yes.
Despite this, wasn't there sort of some fracas that happened where they didn't allow you back, or what happened at sort of the end of your career?
Well,
academic career.
right. I would say, speaking frankly, and believe me, at my age, I have no interest whatsoever in invoking pity. It's water under the bridge. I never had an academic career. I was in academia, it's called being an adjunct. And an adjunct basically means you're hired from semester to semester. It's the equivalent of, literally, the equivalent of a substitute teacher in a public school system, except a substitute teacher is paid significantly more than an adjunct. And I was never able to get beyond the adjunct status, except one brief period at DePaul University in Chicago, where by a concatenation of events, I managed to get on a tenure track job. But when the moment of truth came, I was denied tenure. And after that, because it was a kind of national story, when I was denied tenure, because Professor Alan Dershowitz of Harvard University Law School made a determined public attempt to stop me. There was a big editorial in the Wall Street Journal by him. He made a very public attempt to stop me. After that, that was 2008, 2007. After that, I was completely unemployed, not even adjunct. After that, actually, I know this will come as it will seem kind of unbelievable. I literally couldn't volunteer to teach. There were places where, in high schools, a charter school, for example, in East Harlem, where the father of the principal was a friend of mine. And his daughter, the principal, was really wonderful, and she ran a tight ship. That was a darn good school. You could see just walking through the hallways. I said, I'll volunteer. No. So at that point, after the DePaul incident, I was completely blacklisted, but I never got started. The plane never left the tarmac.
Well, I do want to stress here, as I have been stressing on my show, that these schools are Soviet indoctrination camps. I implore people to read Thomas Sowell's book about inside the American education system. And what he is saying fits perfectly into there. The point is to indoctrinate your children. And if you do not have a doctor, so to speak, that is willing to go into the classrooms and do that indoctrination, they won't let them in. And this is absolutely proof of that. Okay, so I want to sort of give the same background because you were a major piece of me waking up and realizing that I knew nothing about Gaza. Could you just unpack for people who are perhaps hearing this for the first time? I think a lot of people we've seen Israel's support has virtually collapsed, but and that's because of the behavior that's going on with the censorship has become so extreme in America. But let's actually give these people a background education like you gave me when you came on my show of what actually Gaza is, what is the history there, what happened to these people in 1948.
Obviously, within the limits of an interview, it's very hard to go through that history with any kind of.
Well, you have a book for it, so I am going to be a shameless promoter of this because we're going to give you the spark notes here, but Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom is the title of the book that will be relevant for this. But here we're going to give you some spark notes.
Basically, if I were to try to summarize it for the purposes of this conversation, I believe the place to begin is 1948. The State of Israel is created. In the course of its creation, about 90% of the indigenous Palestinian population of Israel was expelled. About 750,000 people. Of those 750,000, about 300,000 were expelled to Gaza. And that's when Gaza kind of became Gaza. It was right now of the population of Gaza, about 80% are refugees from the 1948 war or descendants of those refugees. Under international law, a descendant of a refugee is still counted as a refugee. So it's 80% a refugee population. And it's also about 50% a child population. Now, from the moment Gaza came under Egyptian administration, after the 1948 war, Gaza comes under Egyptian administration. It's a very interesting fact when you start going through the history. There are all these outside observers who go into Gaza, either to work there like under the auspices of the UN, or just to see the situation. And one of the things that struck me was each time somebody goes to Gaza, they describe Gaza as a huge concentration camp. Now, this is still under Egyptian rule. So ELM Burns, the main UN official in Gaza, he writes a book Between Arab and Jew. How does he describe Gaza? He describes it as a huge concentration camp. In 1967, during the June 1967 war, Gaza comes under Israeli control. In July 1967, the father of Al Gore, the presidential candidate, his father was also a senator. So Al Gore, or Senator Gore, meaning the father, he goes to Gaza. He comes back and he testifies before the U.S. Congress. How does he describe Gaza? He says Gaza is, quote, a huge concentration camp on the sand, if you will. You now fast forward to 2002. One of Israel's leading sociologists, his name was Baruch Kimmerling, he writes a little book. The little book is called Politicide. How does he describe Gaza? He describes Gaza as, quote, the biggest concentration camp ever. 2004, the head of Israel's National Security Council. His name is Giora Eiland. He's still around. He's active now behind the scenes in the Netanyahu government. How does he describe Gaza? He describes Gaza as a huge concentration camp. Now, bear in mind, this is before Israel imposed the blockade of Gaza. It was already a horror show. It's been a horror show since 1948. In 2006, Israel imposes a blockade on Gaza. It decides what goes in It decides what goes out. It decides who goes in. It decides who goes out. They put Gaza on what they call a humanitarian minimum diet. You know what that meant? It meant they calculated, literally, we're not talking about hyperbole now, poetry. They calculated the caloric diet of everyone living in Gaza, and they admitted just enough food to avoid scenes of starvation. That was 2006. We're not talking about after October 7th. They prohibited baby chicks from going into Gaza. They prohibited chocolate from going into Gaza. They prohibited potato chips from going into Gaza. They prohibited condiments from going into Gaza. No cinnamon allowed in Gaza. Why? They wanted to create such intolerable conditions that the population of Gaza would overthrow the government that they elected. So that was Gaza. Now, you come to 2006, October 6th, okay? You come to 2006. The Economist magazine, which you know is not a flaming liberal magazine, it describes Gaza as, quote, a human rubbish heap. The leading UN official on Gaza describes it as, quote, a toxic dump. 60% of the young people in Gaza, the people who burst the gates of Gaza on October 7th, 60% of them are unemployed. All they have to look forward to when they get up each morning is to pace the perimeter of this tiny parcel of land, 26 miles long, the length of a marathon, 5 miles wide. That was Gaza. It was exactly what the UN officials said, exactly what Al Gore's father said, exactly what the head of the Israeli National Security Council said. They were born into, they languished in, and they were destined to die in a concentration camp. It was like an elephant burial ground, really. And when I struggled after October 7th, I've said this many times, but it's a fact. It's not a drama point. You know, what happened October 7th was awful. There's no doubt in my mind about that. The magnitude was significant. 1,200 people killed, about estimates, it's not an estimate, close to 800 of them civilians, 400 combatants, Israeli IDF members of the Israeli Defense Forces. So a significant number. Can't get around that. I know there are all sorts of stories about Israel having killed a large number. I've investigated as best I can. And I'll admit, you know, there's still room on the margins for error, but I think was committed by Hamas. And so how do you reckon something like that? But in politics, there are many levels. There's the facts. There's your political judgment. There's your legal judgment. There's your moral judgment. And they don't come directly from the facts. They do not. They go through many filters or sieves before you get a moral judgment. And when I started to try to think it through, I came upon in my mind the Nat Turner Rebellion. So, for those of your listeners who are unaware, it was the largest slave revolt in American history. And Nat Turner, he gave the order. All the historians agree on this. There isn't a huge literature on Nat Turner, but there is a literature. They all agree on one point. He gave the order, which he never denied. He did a famous confession. We don't know how much of the confession is actually him and how much is the person who's writing it. But this part seemed real. The order was kill all white people. Kill all white people. And that's what they proceeded to do. They went on what you might call a 48-hour rampage, less than 48 hours actually, and hacked men, women, babies. It was brutal. It was brutal. But then something struck me. One historian, his name is Stephen Oakes, and he's trying to understand Nat Turner's motivation. Why did he do it? And he said, Nat Turner was a very smart guy. There was no question about that. The person who took down his confession, he said, he was white. He said, white or black, everybody agreed. Nat Turner was a very smart guy. And then he said, the historian now, he said, there was this huge gulf for Nat Turner, very smart guy, between what he aspired to be in life and what he was destined to be because he was a slave. That huge gulf. He knew he was smart. And yet he also knew, as the historian Stephen Oakes put it, that this is only earthly existence he was born into, languish in, and would die a slave. And that was the people, the young people in Gaza. They knew. You see, now Gaza's in the news. But by October 6, 2023, Gaza had vanished from the news. I have made the point, because I do believe it's relevant. I had spent about 15 years just chronicling the details of what's happening in Gaza. I began roughly in the early 2000s. And by 2020, I gave up. That's a fact. And it was not a fact I was proud of, because I was writing books. They were getting more and more detailed. I mean, so micro detail. And nobody was reading them. The last book I wrote was called I Accuse. My publisher, not happily, informed me it sold 370 copies. Of those 370, I purchased half of them. No, it's a fact, because it was about a case related to Gaza in the International Criminal Court. And I was hoping to influence the court through my research. So I was going to present it to the ICC. But by 2020, I said, Norm, you have only one life to live. And am I just going to stubbornly persist in the face of the fact that nobody cares? And that was the situation in Gaza. Gaza had vanished from the political scene. By October 6th, 2023, all the talk was about whether Saudi Arabia, would join the Abraham Accords. Nobody was talking about Gaza anymore. Mm-hmm. And so the people of Gaza basically did what Nat Turner did. Now, here's the thing. Imagine an account of Nat Turner that doesn't mention he was a slave. Just this crazy religious fanatic. He was a religious fanatic. No question about that. Nat Turner was a religious fanatic. He used the language of the Bible to try to make sense of his condition. That's what a religious fanatic meant. John Brown, who led the insurrection before the Civil War, he also was a religious fanatic. He deeply, fanatically believed slavery was an abomination. to the point that, you know, I don't want to get off on a digression, but when Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, when he went to meet John Brown, Douglass comments in one of his, he had 3 autobiographies. In one of them, he comments, he just wouldn't stop talking about slavery. He said he was boring. He was a fanatic. He was Johnny One Note, John Brown, only about slavery. And Nat Turner, too. He was a religious fanatic. But imagine if you tried to make sense of the Nat Turner rebellion by focusing only on his religious fanaticism, like the religiously fanatical Hamas, only focus on that and not mention the guy's a slave.
Or mention, if it were the circumstance for Nat Turner, and it isn't, or mentioned the fact that Nat Turner, actually, the rebellion was funded by money that one of the slave owners gave him. That would be something that would be important if there was the Bibi Netanyahu circumstance there, or that, you know, the slave owners received multiple warnings and for some reason just decided to ignore the fact that this rebellion was brewing. I mean, there's a lot of things. I've been to Israel, and it is, Charlie Kirk said it best immediately after, because he had been many, many times. Truly unbelievable. It's actually quite scary because every 15 feet there's an armed person. They take their security very seriously. Now people are speaking out, and I think a lot more is going to come out because they have been censoring. Bibi has been lying, censoring, editing transcripts. I've been following the case against him pretty closely because there are Israeli publications that have been documenting everything. Obviously, he's not well liked by the people in Israel. They were taking to the streets to protest him, but it is almost unbelievable that circumstance. Plus, when you add to the fact they intercepted a document, right, way earlier that said 200 hostages were going to be taken by Hamas. It's almost unbelievable that they ignored everything, plus Egypt warning them that something was happening on the border. I have never bought that there was not that it took place. Of course it took place and it was terrible, but that it wasn't intentionally allowed. And I truly believe that in my soul after I saw the footage prior to October 7th of Bibi Netanyahu. I'm not sure if you've seen this, but he thinks he's off record. He says, you know, put the cameras down, like off record. And he starts detailing a plan where he's like, we got to hit Gaza so hard that they can't go back. And so they sort of needed a pretext of sorts. And do I think Bibi Netanyahu is evil enough to sacrifice his own people? Yes, 1,000,000 times over. What's been happening in Gaza is a tremendous evil. And I don't think we will truly know the full picture of how evil it was until Bibi Netanyahu is removed from power and we're able to see the transcripts that he's blocking of the conversations he had that day with his cabinet.
Look, obviously, there are areas of interpretation here, and I don't want to pretend as if I have a monopoly in the truth. If you look back at 9/11, okay, our own September 11th, if you look back, and there were many people who wrote at the time, there were a lot of people in the national security establishment who had reports that there was going to be an attack. They came in, the reports came in, no question about that. You have to remember, when you are a state the size of the United States and the power of the United States, you're going to be getting each day 10,000 intelligence reports about possible terrorist attack here, possible terrorist attack there. The United States has a huge number of bases around the world. So you're always getting reports. But a intelligence establishment has to rank threats. And they ranked the Osama bin Laden threat low or lower than it should have been ranked. In the case of Israel, here we're free to disagree. Israel it's a Jewish supremacist state. That's not my opinion, okay? So the head of Israel's main human rights organization, it's called B'Tselem, B'Tselem. And the head of Israel's human rights, B'Tselem, this is a few years ago, it's a guy named Haggai Elad. Very decent guy. I've never met him. I'm not sure if he ever wanted to meet me. But decent guy. He was a Harvard-trained PhD in physics. Serious fellow. Okay? And he put out a little report, or he was the executive director when B'Tselem put out a report. It was probably 10, 15 years ago now. 10. My memory's bad for time now. And he said, here are the basic facts. There's one state from the Mediterranean to the Jordan. There's no Israel and occupied territories. There's just one state. And he said that state, its foundation is Jewish supremacy. There are different levels of Jewish supremacy. It's different for the situation of Arabs, Palestinians living in Israel, Palestinians living in the West Bank, Palestinians living in Gaza, and Palestinian refugees. It's different levels. But the foundation is it's a Jewish supremacist state. Now, why do I mention it? Because for the people of Israel, Gazans are vermin. They're garbage. They're human refuse. And so when you're getting intelligence reports from Gaza that they're going to launch an operation, the Israeli intelligence establishment, this thing, what are you talking about? They're going to outsmart us. They are going to trick us with our surveillance, with our technology, with our IDF. This vermin is going to be able to pull this off. So I think they did the same thing as our Bush administration did with Osama bin Laden. They put it on a low priority. They were shocked that Hamas was able, after October 7th, they were shocked that Hamas was able to pull it off.
Dave Smith, who's a good friend of mine, believes, has your perspective. He does have your perspective.
Yeah, one last point on this, because, and I want to hear you out. You said Israelis hate Netanyahu. I don't think that's true at all. Netanyahu is the longest sitting prime minister in Israeli history. If you follow it, as I do, and you're not obliged to, that's not your niche. Every few years, they report, Netanyahu's going, Netanyahu's going, Netanyahu's out, Netanyahu's finished. No, he's not. And do you know why? Because he's an obnoxious, narcissistic Jewish supremacist. And that's Israeli society. Obnoxious, narcissistic Jewish supremacist. When they see him, they see themselves. So there may be quarrels on this policy issue and that policy issue, but at the end of the day, they keep voting for him. And they vote for him because Netanyahu is not just the face of, he's the reality of Israeli society.
Yeah.
When they try so hard, the people who are critical of Israel, people like Bernie Sanders, who's been not bad in recent years, he has his limits, but he's been okay. He always tries to a laser beam Netanyahu. That's not true. The problem is not Netanyahu. The problem is the whole of Israeli society. If you look at the polls, half of Israeli Jews believe Israel should commit a genocide in Gaza.
Wow.
That's what the polls show. About 70 to 75% in polls say there are no innocents in Gaza. No innocents.
There's nothing but children.
Yeah. No innocents in Gaza, half of the population being Jewish. The former Israeli, or the current Israeli opposition leader, he said that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, they kill children as a hobby. As a hobby.
Yeah, I've seen some videos of like how proud they are when they kill a child, and it's really dark. But also, I will say, you can see psychological conditioning, as in their viewpoints on the Palestinians. You can tell is being nurtured from the time that they're a child. And I ran
totally agree
into
with that.
somebody who left Israel, moved to Tennessee recently, and I ran into him at a farmer's market, and he said, "I absolutely love you, and I want you to know that we learn this stuff from the time we are children."
I totally agree with that.
He said, so he left, and he said, from the time we are children, we learn to hate. So he kind of broke a psychological barrier to get there, obviously, as an Israeli. But you are correct. I mean, and that's why psychology really is the name of the game. When you're talking about religious fanaticism or any other fanaticism, I want to say also, there is an element of psychology. And that is why in my capacity now, that's actually gotten a lot of trouble talking about the history of Sigmund Freud. But if you want to really speak about what is happening with psychology, propaganda, PR, he's the father of all of that. And going back and tracing those roots, it's very scary. I mean, these were really deeply dark people who were trying to cover up their own crimes. And that is the reality, without going off on a tangent here. But you are correct. And I think I would like to hear your perspective on how the tentacles of that Jewish supremacy have manifested, and you are actually, and I'm sure you wouldn't refer yourself as a victim, but I'm saying what happened to you in your life, the circumstances around what happened in your academic career is actually reflected in the Jewish supremacist. These are the perspectives that you have to have if you're going to be welcome into these spaces that we control. How did that happen?
Well, I would want to make the following points. Number one, the Jewish showing since October 7th, it's actually, I'm talking about broadly, American Jewish showing. It's actually not been bad. I'm actually very surprised. So, for example, somebody sent me this, let's see, the most recent poll from the Washington Post. It found that 61% of American Jews say Israel has committed war crimes in Gaza. 40% say Israel has committed genocide there. And about half are opposing what Israel is doing in Gaza. It's about 10% less than the American people in general, but it's not a bad showing. And we should recognize that.
And I say it on my show all the time. I say, when we are, it's important to recognize that. Not only that, because I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, so I grew up in a very Jewish area. And I always remark, these are not the Jewish people that you went to school with, right? We're talking about these hubs of power, D.C., Hollywood. And so it sounds like when you're reading the news, every Jewish person must hold this perspective, and that is not reality.
I want to say, Candace, I'm grateful that you say that. I believe that's factually correct.
Yeah.
If you remember the first demonstrations against the genocide in Gaza, the biggest ones were led by Jews at Grand Central Station, at the Statue of Liberty. It was deeply moving. And they were very active. Jewish students were very active in the encampments around the country.
They were. And they didn't get the same showcasing in the media. They tried to pretty much squash it, but it was there, and that's important to state.
Within that context, where, as I say, the results of the polls aren't bad, in my opinion. Within that context, you use the word hubs. It is a fact, and one has to, in my opinion, face it because it's having real consequences. There's a Jewish supremacist billionaire class which is exerting a huge amount of power and muscle up front and behind the scenes. So I would just go through a few examples.
Can I throw one at you? Barry Weiss becoming the president
yes,
of CBS
yes,
News, where I am telling you, if
that's
she
what you
actually
call-
sat an IQ test,
yeah, that's what you
she would be
call
below average
right. What I
intelligence.
would call that, and I'll get to that.
Yeah.
I would call that Jewish supremacist affirmative action.
Correct.
That's
Beyond
what it
affirmative
is.
action. Yeah,
She
it's
has
crazy.
she has no competence.
She can't even hold a conversation. You don't even want to listen to her.
She is so lacking in gray matter that she couldn't pass the test to be on The View.
How is she not embarrassed to show up for work every day knowing that probably the
everybody
majority,
knows,
everybody knows, the
yes.
majority of people that are, probably everyone is smarter than her. They've worked harder than her. They would be better in that position. And
Totally,
everyone's looking at you
yes,
going,
yes,
this is an affirmative action hire.
yes.
And I call this the children of B'nai B'rith, and people that are reading the books that I'm reading will learn a bit more about that. But it's so obvious. Did a year at Tel Aviv University. She's in the club, so to speak.
She was in the club from a quite young age.
Yeah, she was born
because
into it.
She led the campaign at Columbia University when she was an undergraduate to try to rid the faculty of professors critical of the state of Israel. She lost that battle, but now she's obviously winning
I would die of
others.
embarrassment if I showed up every day and everyone knew that I did not belong there, but like daddy made a phone call sort of a feeling.
Yes.
I've been speaking a lot about Riverbend Ranch because I absolutely love their steaks. I tell you guys that all the time. Black Angus beef is famous for its great flavor, but Riverbend Ranch has taken that to a whole new level. Because over the last 35 years, Riverbend Ranch has been creating an elite Angus herd by using ultrasound technology to select genetically superior cattle with a focus on flavor and tenderness. Each year, Riverbend Ranch provides about 850 elite Black Angus bulls containing these special genetics to over 260 western U.S. ranches. Those partnership ranches receive a substantial premium from Riverbend Ranch for raising those calves without the use of growth hormones and without antibiotics. And every fall, the calves containing these elite genetics return to Riverbend Ranch to spend the following summer in lush mountain pastures. So when you purchase from Riverbend Ranch, you are not only supporting the 64 cowboys and their families who work on the ranch, but you're also supporting the over 260 other U.S. ranches and the hundreds of American families who work on those ranches as well. It's born in the USA, raised in the USA, processed here in the USA. The meat is aged to perfection for 21 days, and it's shipped directly from their ranches to your home. So this is not your average Black Angus beef. This is more flavorful, it's more tender than even the best Angus beef that I've ever tasted. Right now, if you head over to riverbendranch.com and use promo code Candace at checkout, you'll get $20 off your first order. Trust me, you are going to be very impressed. Visit riverbendranch.com and use promo code Candace. Jumping in here to tell you guys about PreBorn, because you know I love them. I've watched so many people who I'm close to be vilified for standing up for the truth. I, of course, have dealt with that myself, but I have also seen something else, which is a lot of courage right now in this moment. I don't play defense anymore. I don't water down what I believe to be palatable, because silence, I have learned, is not kindness. It's actually consent. And right now, the greatest silence is surrounding the topic of the lives that are ended before they even take their first breath. If we're going to call ourselves defenders of life, then we need to act like it. That's why I'm asking you to join me to fight back with action, with truth, and with love. For just $28, that is what it costs to give a free ultrasound to a woman that's in crisis and considering an abortion. $28 will help her save a life that's growing inside of her. It gives her the truth that our culture does not provide. So don't sit this one out. Don't wait for permission. Be bold, be clear. We should be unapologetically pro-life. Head to preborn.org/Candace right now. Give $28. You can also give 10 times that amount if you can. This is the line that I think that we must stand on. We have to stand for truth and what's right. We need to save lives from abortion and stand firm in the gospel. Again, that is preborn.org/Candace to provide an ultrasound for just $28.
So when very shortly into October 7th, I'm asked to do a debate, and I said, fine, by Lex Fridman. He asks me to do a debate.
Surprised by that.
I said, who do you want me to debate? He said, this thing called destiny. I didn't know what that person was. This thing called destiny. I said,
got a date with destiny.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You are my destiny. I don't claim to a distinguished academic pedigree, but at this point in my life, I'm not debating a thing called destiny. So I said to Lex Fridman, thanks, but no thanks. And then by the way, I didn't know who Lex Fridman was either. I don't follow podcasts or things like that. I'm a book person, old-fashioned. And then he gets back to me about 3 weeks later, and he says, "How would you like to debate Benny Morris?" I said, "Sure. Benny Morris is Israel's senior historian. I know his work very well, and it would be exciting for me, actually, from an intellectual level, to actually face him, because I had written a lot on him." And then Lex Friedman says, "And Destiny." I'm wondering, why are you harping on Destiny?
This random streamer.
Yeah,
So
it was
strange.
strange.
Mm.
Exactly. It was so strange. I then thought to myself, if I refused, then it would look like I'm afraid to debate Benny Morris, because he's Israel's senior historian and very smart. He knows his stuff, for sure. And I didn't want that to be broadcast far and wide, Finkelstein afraid to debate Benny Morris. So I said, okay, if he wants to come along with Benny Morris, this thing called Destiny, I said, okay, I'll do it. And I said, I'll debate with my good friend, very smart guy, Muin Rabbani, top of the line, and we have the same political outlook. So why do I mention it? A few months later, I'm having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he says to me, "You know, Destiny was paid to be on with you." I said, "No, nobody told me that." He said, "Yeah, he was," and he described it, because he was discreet. He described it as a Israel advocacy group had groomed him to debate me, and had, I'm using the words he said, paid him handsomely to debate me. And it's an unimpeachable source. By the way, the person who told me this is not political at all. Just by coincidence, he could say with absolute certainty, and I know it. Why do I mention it? Because at that time, this was like this first month into October 7th, it was a kind of a revelation. But now we're 2 years later. We're 2 years later. In the time that's elapsed, not one, not two, three Ivy League presidents were toppled. There's never been, I know the history of academic freedom in our country, I've written on it. There's never been anything like it. This massive assault. How was it conducted? It started with people like Bill Ackman, the billionaire. He threatens Harvard. You don't crush the encampments, you don't get alumni money. It was very, very straightforward. It was pure blackmail. And
which is, by the way, their favorite tactic. Financial blackmail comes first.
It was financial blackmail. If you look at the Harvard report on anti-Semitism, one Jewish alumni, gave Harvard $200 million. One alumni gave Harvard $300 million. Ackman, $50 million. And then there was a petition organized. My memory is, but the number probably increased vastly. The original version of the petition, 1,200 Jewish alumni from Harvard threatened to withhold the alumni contributions. And so, systematically, these college presidents are being ousted. I can quote to you, but I can't tell you the source, but I could tell you, no, you have to judge people by their track record, whether I have a track record of being accurate or inaccurate. When President McGill was deposed from the University of Pennsylvania, a person approached her who knew her to express commiseration with her situation. And she replied with 2 words, "Money talks."
I can speak to that. I mean, I've lived it, and that is the first thing that happens, which is financial blackmail. And a lot of people want to know, well, why is this person doing this, or why are they not saying it? And like, at the end of the day, they let you know you'll lose everything. And some people go, well, it's not risk. I'd rather just toe the line so that I can keep life as I know it. And so, yeah, the majority of people are facing that. They have families to feed, and they don't know how to restart, because in most circumstances, it's all they've ever known. right? So you're talking about someone who's maybe been in the academia for a very long time, and they're going, not only will we forcefully kick you out, we'll also slap a tag on you and call our friends in the media, like a Barry Weiss when she was at New York Times, to smear you and libel you as an anti-Semite. And so you're asking for a type of bravery that I would say most people don't have. And they just go, I'm going to shut up. But
Mm.
the answer to that for people that are listening is take your kids out of the schools. You don't need these schools. I mean, what is the upside? You're paying an absolute fortune for your children to go to debt. The system is rigged anyway, right? You think they're going to have the same jobs they want their children to go on. What does it say about our society that Norm Finkelstein can achieve tenure, but an admitted child rapist like Jeffrey Epstein had a office at Harvard University? Like that wasn't what caused the billionaire backlash, which would have made sense. We're all pulling our money unless you get this person who doesn't have any sort of an academic career, by the way, off of our campus. No, and this was after he admitted and served time in jail. Jeffrey Epstein still had an office at Harvard University campus. And that's why I say to people, that's a Mossad operation, no matter which way you look at it. Harvard University, in my view, is running a Mossad operation. But again, don't want to get lost on another tangent. You are absolutely correct that is a stunning example of how the mechanics are when we're speaking about their system of financial blackmail.
There are many aspects to it, and a lot of it has come out in recent months, the paying people of $7,000 for each post in support of Israel.
Life-changing money for most influencers. Imagine that.
Yes,
you can tweet 10 times a day and have $70,000. And I know for a fact, you're saying you can't speak to your source. I know for a fact, because I know someone who took the money, and they wouldn't tell me what billionaire it was, but I can tell you around May of this year, whenever I termed it Operation Mocking Pastor was happening, where every pastor, it seemed, jumped on stage one Sunday and said, don't follow Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, a very weird sermon to preach all on the same day. It was right after Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson had debated. There was a billionaire that went out and offered what they said to me was an obscene amount of money for people to begin influencing by creating anti-Candace and Tucker videos. So that's how it works. I mean, that is just how it works. But I think before they were a little less arrogant and they wanted to be less obvious that that's how it worked. And now there's a panic happening. And so in their desperation, and this is what's happened over the last 2 years, they've just been sort of in your face. We're throwing money at the cause. We control everything. And we don't care if you know about it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That now it's become, as I said, it operates in two levels. Part of it is remarkably in your face. Bill Ackman, a hedge fund manager, decides on his own who is going to be president of Harvard University. You know, there's nothing like that in our history. Just the brazenness of it.
And recently, how about Bibi Netanyahu on camera with American influence? I mean, this is, I said in commentary about this, a couple of years ago, if you said that Jewish people held power in media, you'd be referred to as an anti-Semite. Fast forward to today, and you have Bibi Netanyahu sitting down saying that I need this deal to go through on TikTok because that is a weapon that we need to be able to use in a room on camera with American influencers. So that is just, and they're saying, how do we combat Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson? We don't have any power. I shoot this show in my basement, you know? I'm not feeding into some web and getting paid from foreign influencers or being funded by Qatar. I mean, all smears and libels. And so what does that say when you have a foreign country leader, Bibi Netanyahu, saying that on camera?
Well, I totally agree with that. The fact that he just blatantly says we have to control the media. I would say, in response to what you said a few moments ago, you said it does take a lot of courage to resist this. I would say there are levels of courage that it requires. So we'll take the most recent case that came out was public, of Van Jones. Van Jones is not a poor man.
Certainly not.
He got $100 million from Jeff Bezos. These are insurance policies. He gave Obama $100 million. He gave Van Jones $100 million. Why? It's perfectly obvious, because he knows at some point there's going to be a major strike at Amazon, because it's a huge operation with a large number of people who are paid substandard wages. So he has an insurance policy. Make sure if and when that moment comes, Obama will be on his team. Van Jones will be on his team. That's a straightforward transaction, business transaction. But it's money, $100 million. So why does he do this? Why does he come on TV with his yellow ribbon? I live in an all-Jewish neighborhood in Ocean Parkway, Brooklyn. There's literally a synagogue in every block. In some blocks, there are 2 synagogues. You walk up and down Ocean Parkway. It's all Jewish. I don't see anyone wearing a yellow ribbon. I know.
No, I know.
I don't see anyone wearing a yellow ribbon. Why is Van Jones advertising the flag? He's just advertising, I'm a slave.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying.
He used to brand slaves.
And he's just a slave. And
this is how I feel when I see people in Congress. I mean, think about a presidential
slaves.
debate wearing a flag pin from a flag that is, it's not American. It's like you're just a slave.
And he's wearing the yellow ribbon here. If there were any what you call truth in advertising, he would wear a dollar sign here, a dollar gold pin over here, because it's just money. It's such a revolting sight. And he goes on with Bill Maher and Tom Friedman, 2 Jewish supremacists, and they're laughing about dead Gazan babies. Very funny. They're laughing about. And the thing is, Van Jones knows they're not just laughing with him, they're laughing at him.
Yeah.
He's our slave.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have even that minimum self-respect and dignity. He makes jokes about dead Palestinian babies. So,
gosh, I didn't hear whatever joke that he said, and so that makes my skin crawl.
He said that if you open up TikTok, all you see is dead Palestinian babies, dead Palestinian babies, dead Palestinian babies, ditty, dead Palestinian babies. And he says, do you know why you only see that? He says, because the Iranians and Qatar are behind it. They are manipulating the media. But there's another possible explanation. You know what the possible explanation is? Maybe there are a lot of dead Palestinian babies. In fact, just the very first month, just October 2023, do you know more Palestinian children were killed just that first month than all the other war zones in the world combined in 2019, 2020, or 2021, or 2021. If you combine them, if you combine each year, every other war zone, this tiny parcel of land called Gaza, more children were killed. Now, it's about the minimum estimate. The minimum estimate is 20,000 children killed. Now, if you look at the human rights reports, they'll probably come as a surprise to you. You look at the most recent one, it's put out by the UN, the Nimi Skincare Commission. Nimi Skincare was the former human rights chief in the UN, and then she was on the tribunal, the president of the tribunal on Rwanda. She's from South Africa. They report Israel targets children, targets them in the head and in the chest. Israel targets toddlers. That's the word they use. Targets toddlers in Gaza. They said in the report, in order for children who are suffering from malnutrition, I know you have 4 children, so you'll be much more knowledgeable than me. They need a special infant baby formula. I guess it's a high-protein infant baby formula. Israel bans it. But for Van Jones, with his frat boys, Tom Friedman, it's all Qatari and Iranian propaganda.
But and what's interesting about that is they cannot produce a shred of proof that anybody is funded by Qatar. It's a literal talking point that has been fictionalized by Bibi Netanyahu's agents. You have to register under FARA every time you take a meeting. They cannot produce one shred of proof to that effect, and yet all of the proof is here that actually
totally
everyone is funded by Israel in America. And so you just go for Van Jones. I mean, I can't imagine going to bed every night and just realizing it doesn't matter how nice your house is. You're still a slave. You're still a slave. And
to advertise it, the yellow ribbon.
Yeah.
Who wears the yellow ribbon?
Mm-hmm.
Does Ben Shapiro still wear it?
Did he used to wear it?
I think he used to.
I'm not sure.
But currently, this is 2 years later. I don't know anyone but he still wears it. Just to show, I'm sure it's in his contract. If you wear the yellow ribbon, an extra $1,000, a bonus, $1,000.
and that is, it's really important for people to know that how the dynamics work, because they do this through charity. And I know that there are other people that are working on a report on this now, because it's become so obvious of how they will even give people the permission, these influencers, to say, well, I'm not taking any foreign money. Okay, nobody expected that you were receiving a check from Bibi Netanyahu. What they do is they'll flood the zone and they'll give money to like the International Fellowship of Christian and Jews, or put money into a church. And then those individuals will then give money to influencers. It's like, it's such an obvious game. And I will say on the quote unquote Christian side of things, we're seeing that people are awakening to these pastors that are going on these multiple trips to Israel and coming back and telling their congregants that no matter what, they have to support Bibi Netanyahu. I mean, it's nutty, but I'm happy because it does seem as though we are reaching this inflection point where the correct people who, and the honest people, rather, who have been telling the truth for a very long time are finally getting their day.
I would say public opinion is shifting, for sure. I'll return to that in a moment. As I said, there's such a complete unwillingness to see the situation you're placed in when you are, you're just a slave for these folks. So you take the case of Barry Weiss, okay? And there are people who work in her outfit who are not Jewish. She wrote a little book. It was a stupid book. It was a comic. It wasn't a book. It's sort of I teach, and it was something you get from a paper from a freshman paper. And how does she end the book? Let me just quote. This is how it's a book about anti-Semitism and how to fight it. Like she knows about fighting anti-Semitism. Here she writes, "This is the force of who we are. We are a people descended from slaves who brought the world ideas that changed the course of history. One God, human dignity, the sanctity of life, freedom itself. This is our inheritance. That is our legacy. We are the people commanded to bring light into this world." I mean, these are just, that's a passage you would, if you replace the proper noun, it's something you'd read in Mein Kampf. That's their mentality. These are Jewish supremacists. And what did they think of a Van Jones? What's going through their head when they see a Coleman Hughes?
They'll never,
What do they think?
They'll never be us.
Complete contempt.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Complete contempt. our slaves.
100%. Yeah.
It's pitiful,
Mm.
really. Um,
And they could ruin those people in 4 seconds. Like, it's like, you are literally our property. And I sensed that, because I do wanna add this one element, like, before October 7th, there were tons of people who were on the quote unquote pro-Israel side like me, meaning never cared to look at the issue. Sounds okay, basic. I'm not going to speak about this issue because I don't really know about it, and it's not relevant to speak about. Like, I really entered in the scene of politics really intent on sort of waking up Black America to other layers of slavery, like, what we learned in the classroom, and constantly thinking that we have to marry ourselves to one party, and now I'm kind of through both and being like, actually, both sides are really bad. But yeah, so it's very, I do want people to be forgiving and know that some people genuinely just don't know. But now we're not there. We're not at that point anymore. People don't know. They
I agree
very
with
much
that.
know, and they are making a conscious decision that the cash means more to them than the truth, that they are willing to allow children to be murdered and killed every day, plucked off in Gaza,
And joke about
and to
it.
tell jokes about it, and to spread lies about the condition that is happening. When you see, if you do not have a spiritual reaction to seeing those children that are starving every day, they will always pluck the one example of, this guy wasn't actually starving, and so therefore nobody's starving. And it is so plainly obvious that that is untrue. Again, before October 7th, that would have been untrue. That you just wonder if these, like, I just don't know how they do it. I genuinely don't know how they do it, because I would rather lose everything, as I've proven, take it all, than to speak something that is untrue, because I know that my soul will pay a consequence for that.
As I said, 40% of American Jews are convinced Israel is committing genocide.
Yeah.
But Coleman Hughes doesn't see it.
Mm.
Van Jones doesn't see it. There is a British proverb, there are none so blind as those who will not see. And if you know the Bob Dylan song from my generation, Blow in the Wind, how many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? Well, if the remuneration is enough, many times.
Well, I think that's also, and I know that you don't engage much on social media, and you also don't even have a cell phone, but I released this week, I sort of waited for everybody to lie, which they did, of course, they love lying, about Charlie Kirk and what he was going through in the end. And I released the text message chain 48 hours before he died, where he said, they've left me no choice but to abandon the pro-Israel cause. And I really think that the best person that put it very plainly, like, if you lost Charlie Kirk, who was actually so committed to Israel, for him, as he started evangelical Christian, and then he couldn't unsee, and he said explicitly in his message, because of Jewish behavior. And we know what he meant. He didn't mean all Jews in America. It's like that power that we are talking about that happens, and the way they were treating him as if suddenly he woke up and realized, like I did, oh, I thought that you guys were supporting me because you were my friends. I thought you supported me because I will pursue the facts. I thought you supported me because you wanted me to have a platform, because I will speak truth to power. And then when you turned around and realized, well, wow, I was just a slave to you. You view me as something other. And for Charlie, I think he was realizing at the end, or maybe he never understood it, that if you take the king's shilling, you fight the king's war.
Well, there's a proverb. I'm not familiar with that proverb, but there's he who pays the piper calls the tune.
Mm-hmm. And
Mhm.
what do you do when you have a not-for-profit 501c3 that has taken millions of dollars? And Bob Shillman was one person who took $2 million away from him instantly if he didn't, start peddling the correct talking points about Israel. And he was just done in the end.
Mhm.
And then, he died. So it was no longer a problem, but they then rushed to misrepresent and to pretend that that period didn't happen. He literally told Bibi Netanyahu on the phone, no, because they were panicked about losing Charlie. He calls and
Mhm.
invites him to Israel, and Charlie said no. And yet Bibi then rushed to lie, or I guess to not tell the whole truth, when he says, I called him 2 weeks ago and invited him to Israel. It's like, and what did he say, Bibi? What did
Mhm.
what did Charlie say back to you? So it is Yeah, we see that story playing out right now where you see the fight to make sure that they control people that genuinely, like me and Charlie, believe that they were just our friends and believed in our mission to just tell the truth no matter what that truth is. Which means that naturally, if you're interested and committed to truth, your perspectives will change with more information, which is what happened to me. My perspective changed because, well, not even more information, just information in general, in large part thanks to the work that you're doing and people like Dave Smith. And yeah, it really woke me up to what happened there.
There is the money issue, and then the money issue is combined with the wholesale assault on academic freedom and on freedom of speech. So we'll just take a recent example. There were several young people, they were what's called non-citizen immigrants here, people like Mahmoud Khalil at Columbia University. And they were rounded up, sent off to strange places. In some cases were things like literally writing an op-ed in the tough school newspaper. That's it. Critical of the administration because of its support of Israel, de facto support of Israel. And there was 2 weeks ago, a decision came down in Eastern District Court on this whole case with these guys, okay, who were arrested by ICE, put in strange places. The guy who wrote the decision, his name is Judge Young. He was a Reagan appointee. So we're not talking about a Hamas supporter, a Reagan appointee. And he wrote a 161-page decision. And he said, non-citizen immigrants, they have the right to free speech. That's in our jurisprudence. They have that right. Number two, he said they didn't say anything that crossed any line. They supported the Palestinians. They didn't support Israel. This is America. Mm. You have the right to free speech. You yourself might be surprised. Our Supreme Court has ruled you have the right to advocate the violent overthrow of our government. The violent overthrow of our government. You have that right. That's what our Supreme Court ruled. Our Supreme Court ruled you have the right to burn the American flag. During the war in Vietnam, there were a large number of demonstrators, myself included. You may not like it. I'm talking about our laws. We chanted, ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, the NLF, National Liberation Front, is going to win. Mm. Nobody got arrested for that. Nobody got pulled up off the street for that. There were literally millions of people chanting things like that. Now these young people in the encampments, they're chanting things like, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I don't like that slogan personally, but that's their right. This is America. And the judge ruled, Reagan appointee, he's 85 years old, he says, by not letting them speak, rounding them up, sending them off to strange places, he says, quote, you're terrorizing, that's the word he used, you're terrorizing people's right to free speech. He said when ICE puts on the masks, you know what he said? I'm quoting him word for word. These are cowardly desperados acting like the Ku Klux Klan. That's the words he used. Who was behind this assault on our freedom of speech?
The Trump administration.
No, the Trump administration, you could say broadly, but on the specific issue of the encampments and Israel and Palestine, that was the Jewish billionaire class.
The Trump administration.
Yeah.
So we're in radical agreement.
But remember, it began under Biden.
Yeah,
The crime,
I'm talking about when he actually Mahmoud Khalil, because I followed that case,
right.
and because I believed in Trump and I voted for Trump, and
I agree with that part.
they got up there and they pretended he was some terrorist and they
yeah.
lied, and I'm like, but he wasn't, and we were the ones that said that we would fight for free
He
speech the
was
hardest.
actually the mediator at
I know,
Columbia. He was
I know,
the mediator.
I followed it, yeah.
You know, so it's a wholesale assault on freedom of speech in our society, and it was led by these people, the same billionaire class
that cut checks. And this is the problem when you take the money, which I say you fight the king's
I
wars.
totally.
How did Trump get into office? Who cut him the checks? Like, who cut him a $100 million check? Miriam Adelson. And so the presidency can be bought, okay? There's no question.
Yes, I think,
as all things in America, there is a certain level where you can outright purchase influence, and it's hard for us to recognize that. And I had to really come to terms with that. This has been hard for me as someone who has been a vocal supporter of Trump, truly believed that he sort of beat the billionaire class to get into office, to see him so radically in this term specifically shift on his perspectives of speech. I actually feel watching him pains me to see this administration play Twister to explain, while we're free speech, but this is different. These are Hamas supporters, all of these psychological games. And you're not instantly a Hamas supporter if you have questions about what's going on over there. And by the way, they also gaslight us where they're like, then they get to you're obsessed with us. It's like, no, you guys were the ones that insisted that we all have a perspective on October 7th. And so when some of us actually said, okay, well, let me get educated, because maybe let me roll my sleeves up and be radically pro-Israel. Then when we looked and we pierced that veil, we went, oh my goodness, how was I ever pro-Israel? And now you want us to shut up. Now you want our influence gone. Now you want to smear us as anti-Semites and Hamas supporters. And it really is telling.
Well, there are two aspects. Number one, this is America. You're allowed to be a Hamas supporter. That's our freedom. I am not a flag waver, but facts are facts. That's what was determined by our Supreme Court. And secondly, they're not.
Right.
I mean, you're correct. They're not.
They're not, and even if they were.
I know.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're not.
And even if they were.
That was what the judge said. The judge said, I disagree with a lot of the things these people say, but that's their right.
And I just also want to say this to just kind of get this off of my chest, because this is what deeply troubles me the most, going back to your slave analogy, which is actually not an analogy. What it feels like to me when these, and now I recognize Jewish supremacists, supported me and platformed me when I was attacking BLM. Because I recognized this altogether Marxist strand, and I was saying, and I stood up to my own people, right? My own people, and said, let me tell you why this is not going to work out. Let me tell you Granddad's lessons. I wrote an entire book. You're amazing, Candace. Let me get you this platform, that platform, fly you here. And then when I was like, oh yeah, and I know this is going to be hard for you, but you guys are now going to have to stand up to the Jew. Get out of here. Get out of here. You are gone. You are banned from Australia for speech.
Yeah.
I mean, think about this. This is crazy. And I'm going, so what was I to you, actually? I was never, there was a difference here. You didn't agree with me principally on the BLM stuff. You didn't, because if the principles held, if you said, I believe in free speech, and you have to sometimes stand up in your own identity box and say something is wrong, they didn't agree with me principally. That troubles me.
Yeah, it should trouble you. That's what happened to Glenn Lowry. I'll just tell you an anecdote. Let's call it a October 7th and thereafter anecdote. So I wrote a book having nothing to do with Israel-Palestine. It was on cancel culture, this book, okay? And I was very critical of the cancel culture, the woke phenomenon. I didn't agree with it. I strongly disagreed with it. So Glenn Lowry has me on, okay? Now remember, I said I had given up on Gaza. And one of the things I did after I had given up on Gaza was write this book on cancel culture. Totally different subject. So Glenn Lowry has me on. Truth be told, I didn't want to talk about Gaza. I didn't want to talk about Israel-Palestine. I had left it behind. I'm speaking factually, not proudly. I had left it behind. So Glenn Lowry says, he begins the show. It's on the YouTube. You could see it. He begins the show by saying, I would be remiss in my responsibility if I didn't ask you about your views on Israel-Palestine. I didn't bring up the subject. He brought up the subject. Anybody curious, go watch the program. I had no intention whatsoever of talking about it. He brought it up. So he asked me my opinions. I expressed them. And then we went on to talk about the book. Okay? Next week, he does a program. Doesn't tell me anything. He and John McWhorter, they devote about 20 or 30 minutes. I didn't watch the whole thing. It was kind of too painful. Not because of what they said about me, but the smarminess, the fact that they didn't alert me to what they were going to do. You know, the African-American spiritual scandalized my name. I gave my brother my right hand, and as soon as ever my back was turned, he scandalized my name.
That's how I feel.
Do you call that a brother? No, no. Behind my back, they start to psychoanalyze me, John McWhorter. I mean, he knew me for the length and breadth of the program. And what happens? After October 7th, Glenn Lowry gets pressure. I have to talk about what's happening here. And he has on Omer Bartov, who's a senior scholar, says Israel is committing genocide. What happens? The Manhattan Institute pulls the plug.
Wow.
You didn't know that?
Mm-mm.
Oh, I'm surprised he didn't have you on. Yeah, they pulled the plug. Lost all the money. So, on this, John McWhorter, he says, every day these poor Jewish students, they have to hear all of this anti-Semitism at Columbia University. So, just as a factual matter, all this anti-Semitism, first of all, legally, even if they were being anti-Semitic,
Right.
they have the right. But is there any truth to it? So the most substantial report on the subject came out from Harvard, 314 pages, alleging anti-Semitism. I read the report. I don't see anything. I said, probably missed something. That happens. I reread it. Actually, I see less. It's what Brianna Joy Gray would call a nothing burger. There's nothing there. So you try to figure out, here's the question. How could you fill 314 pages on anti-Semitism at Harvard when if you actually read the report, there's nothing there? Evidence of anti-Semitism, there's nothing. So then you see the trick. There's a little verbal trick. The trick is, they say, quote, for the purposes of this report, we are going to define anti-Semitism as any time Jewish students, in particular, they said, Israeli Jewish students, every time they feel that they're being excluded in the classroom or being excluded in extracurricular activities or they're being excluded in social life. That's going to be the definition of anti-Semitism. Well, what does that mean de facto? So there are all these Israelis who are coming over to Harvard after serving in Gaza, right? And you are commanded now by Harvard in the name of what they call inclusiveness and pluralism. You have to pal around with them. And if you don't pal around with them, you're an anti-Semite. That's literally, I am not exaggerating a jot.
If you don't want to be friends with murderers.
Exactly.
You're an anti-Semite.
If you don't
well,
want,
maybe if that's the new definition,
right, if you don't want to,
maybe I've been an anti-Semite my whole life.
right,
I get what they're saying.
If you don't want to hang around with child killers,
Yeah.
you're an anti-Semite.
If you don't like Jeffrey Epstein, I mean, if you don't like Jeffrey Epstein, you're an anti-Semite. I feel like people that abuse children also. I get what we're doing off definition. Okay,
yeah, so it's essentially a command coming from the top down that we have to normalize child killers. We have to say, okay, Candace when she applied to Harvard, she had worked in a food kitchen, and she put that in her personal statement. And Joe here, he helped build a sanitation system in the Congo. And then there is Yaakov. Yaakov killed children in Gaza. No, really. And we're supposed to treat all three as the same in the name of inclusiveness and pluralism. Now, that to me is a dictionary definition of insanity. I had a long exchange with a person I count as a friend. I like him very much, Cornel West. It was a public exchange. And another woman who I absolutely like, her name is Nadine Strassen, the former executive director of the ACLU. And we got into, there was no animus, hostility, but it was intense. Because Dr. West's argument was, if we excluded everybody who had blood in their hands or who propagated ideas that caused blood to be on your hands, he said that would exclude a large part of the Harvard faculty. You know, they're advisors to governments, and they write books which influence public opinion. He said, that's a slippery slope if you start that kind of exclusion. And Nadine Strassen, she said that we have to invite everybody because the only way you can get the truth is hearing out all opinions. And I have to say that they can defend themselves, and they did in the course of the exchange. But to me, because I do tend to, like yourself, I gather, I do tend to personalize things. So let's say after World War II, there's a Nazi concentration camp guard. Because those were perfectly ordinary people who were guards in the camp. And one of them is an exchange student at Harvard. Perfectly possible. Okay? Now you're telling me I should pal around with them?
If you don't want to be called an
anti-German. Yeah. I should be inclusive?
Well, nobody was more inclusive of the Nazis than the American CIA with Operation Paperclip and just giving them new identities. But but when it's convenient, they want you to forget everything someone does. When it's not convenient, don't ever forget what this person has done or who their family and grandfather is.
Totally.
At the drop of a hat, they decide.
Totally agree. But you know what? That's not me. And I don't believe that's Dr. West. And I don't believe it's Nadine Strassen. I believe that in the real world, if they had to confront that situation, they wouldn't pal around with them.
No.
You know?
Of course they wouldn't.
And that was the command at the end of this 314-page report, that you have to be inclusive of the Israeli Jewish students. We have to be pluralistic. No.
Which, by the way, one of the most offensive...
They called it, you have to stop shunning them. That's the word.
I'm actually comfortable shunning murderers.
Totally,
call me whatever you need to call me. That's why I always say you got to get over their game of ad hominem attacks, because if we've got to be called names to not hang out with murderers, we got to get comfortable with that real fast.
That's exactly. You got to get comfortable real fast with murderers. No, that was the anti-Semitism no, I wouldn't, certainly not a majority, but a significant number of the campus protesters were Jewish.
Mm.
How is it that they didn't detect this rampant anti-Semitism?
Also want to tell you guys about PDS Debt, because debt from credit cards is not an accident. It's actually a system built to keep Americans down. The banks profit, the creditors win, and families lose. Every call, every fee, every high-interest trap is another reminder that the game is completely rigged. But there's another side of the story, too. PDS Debt has already helped hundreds of thousands fight back, cutting debt, ending the calls, and putting money back where it belongs, which is in American pockets. Whether you are struggling with credit cards, personal loans, or medical bills, the PDS Debt has custom options that can help you get out of debt. They go beyond the numbers to understand your unique financial situation and to craft a personalized plan that's designed just for you. There's no minimum credit score required. They're here to help you save money, pay off your debt faster, and start putting money back where it belongs. PDS Debt is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau. It boasts thousands of 5-star reviews on Google, and it holds a 5-star rating on Trustpilot. Why? Because PDS has helped hundreds of thousands of people get out of debt. It's your money, it's your future, so do not let the system decide for you. You are just 30 seconds away from being debt-free. Get your free assessment and find the best option for you right now at pdsdebt.com/Candace. Again, that's pdsdebt.com/Candace. All right, guys, do you owe back taxes? A lot of people do, or you're maybe having tax returns that are not filed. The October 15 deadline has officially passed. Maybe you forgot to file an extension. Well, if you haven't gathered all your documents or made any estimated payments, you could soon be targeted by the IRS. That's the reality. They can garnish your wages. They can freeze your bank account. They can even seize your property. But there is help available. Tax Network USA, a nationwide tax firm, has helped the taxpayers save over $1 billion in tax debt. They've filed hundreds of thousands of tax returns, and they've assisted thousands in reducing their tax burdens. And they can help you too. Don't wait. Visit tnusa.com/Candace or call 1-800-958-1000 for a 100% free consultation. In one short call, the experts at Tax Network USA will guide you through some simple questions to determine how much you can save. Take action now before it's too late. Visit tnusa.com/Candace or call 1-800-958-1000. Also want to tell you guys about Field of Greens, because we all have two ages, our actual age and our body's internal biological age. Because many Americans eat so many processed foods and not enough fruits and veggies, they are 10 plus years older on the inside than their actual age. A major university study suggests how to slow down aging. Participants slowed their aging down by drinking Field of Greens. That's all they did. They didn't change their eating, drinking, or exercising. They just started drinking Field of Greens. Each fruit and vegetable in Field of Greens was doctor selected for specific health benefits like cell health, heart, lungs, kidneys, metabolism. And I feel great knowing how Field of Greens can slow down how quickly I'm aging, and I encourage you all to join me. Swap your untested fruit, vegetable, or green drink for Field of Greens while there's still time. Check out the university study and you'll get 20% off when you use promo code Candace at fieldofgreens.com. Again, that's fieldofgreens.com, promo code Candace. So I wanted to actually, because one of your books, and this one I have not read, is called The Holocaust Industry. I want to talk to you about the Holocaust, and please allow me to be offensive, as I've been learning a lot about the Holocaust and why it is such a precious area where you are not allowed. There's no incursion. You can't ask a question. You can't even, if I said, you know what, I think it was 5 million, forget it. I mean, it is very precious and protected. And as I've sort of began reading more books, I do have a theory, and you may be offended by this theory, and you can push back on it. But particularly, I felt even more confirmed in this theory. Are you familiar with Nicholas Gruner?
No.
Okay, so Nicholas Gruner was an actual Auschwitz camp survivor. He was on the march, same march as your parents were on.
My father.
Yeah, your father was on, and he wrote a book in Yiddish about his experiences. And there was his friend who was with him on this walk, who he wanted to reunite, wrote this book in Yiddish. And when he found out that his friend had wrote this book and it had been translated into English, he went to go meet him, right? And it was like, I'm going to be reunited with somebody that was in this camp with me. He gets up to shaking this person's hand, and he's like, "You've taken on the identity. This you're not the real survivor. That person whose hand he shook was Elie Wiesel. You might be familiar with him because he wrote the book Night, and it was proven that he lied about certain parts of it. Nobody knew why, what this was. And so he then spent the rest of his life, Nicholas Gruner, dedicated to telling people that this man was effectively a gypsy who stole the identity of a real person. And he said, Nicholas rolled up his sleeve. He's like, we all have tattoos. He's not going to have one because he's not the real guy. This guy took his identity. Well, it turns out that Ellie Weitzel was a cousin to Robert Maxwell, right? Fascinating, right? Absolutely fascinating. Robert Maxwell wrote about it in his own book, his authorized biography. And we know Robert Maxwell, obviously, who everything about there is to know about him. And I was fascinated by this idea that there were people who were stealing the identity, whether dead or alive, of people who had actually been in the Auschwitz camps, building on their stories in whatever way. And it's sad that nobody knows Nicholas Gruner's name. People should know his name because it was a valiant fight, and he to the very end said there are people who are stealing our identities. And I go, I've got this feeling that happened a lot more than we think it happened. This is one guy. And by the way, Robert Maxwell then purchased a massive stake early on in McGraw Publishing, McGraw-Hill, which means that, and then his wife was traveling around with Ellie Weitzel. And this guy was like, this was not prisoner number, whatever it was. He took his identity. And that's a really terrifying thing to think about, that people with power saw, okay, these people were in camps. Maybe they perished. We can take their identities, take their stories, whatever it is. He never found out what happened to his friend. He assumes he died sometime after the camp. And he did write, it was his friend who wrote the manuscript in Yiddish, and then Ellie Weitzel adopted that. And now we have today, as you determine, a Holocaust industry. I'd like you to describe that, but just what I'm telling you, I mean, isn't that just the most terrifying thing ever?
We don't really know each other. And we're having a serious conversation now. And we should try to parse it, analyze it carefully.
Yeah.
So let me give you, as I understand it, the situation, not just from family history, but from having read quite a lot in the subject at a certain point in my life, having read quite a lot, I would say almost obsessively because of my family history, and having written on aspects of it. The estimates are there was an extermination campaign by the Nazis. We don't know. Two main questions remain open. Two questions remain open. The two questions that remain open are when. When did it begin? That still is an ambiguous area. When did this Nazi extermination camp actually begin? Nazi extermination plan, and we still don't know with any kind of certainty why. What was Hitler's exact motive at that point? So the when and the why, they remain gray areas. Now, I have to be, for people who are listening, I have to be careful. I stopped reading about the subject about 20 years ago. So there may be new scholarship which supersedes what I have just said, but that's it. Here are the two crucial facts. One, I don't consider it crucial. The estimates by the best historians are between 5.2 and 5.4 million Jews were killed. It doesn't make much of a difference. Let's say it wasn't, but let's say it was 3 million. That doesn't make it better, obviously. Okay, but the estimates are between 5.2 and 5.4. Now, coming to your question. The Nazi extermination was very efficient. You can use a slur and say it was done with German efficiency. And to some extent, there's a truth to that. You know, what makes a cliche is it's most of the time true. What is a generalization? A generalization is something that's generally true. What's a stereotype? A stereotype is a generalization that you don't like. If you say Jews are smart, Jews like that generalization. If you say something else about Jews, that's a stereotype. But the Germans carried out the Nazi extermination with great efficiency. Why is that important? There were very few survivors. Now, Candace, I'm not trying to, I don't have an axe to grind. I'm just telling you factually. You take my mother. She had 2 sisters and a brother.
Mm.
They were exterminated. She had a mother and father. They were exterminated. My father, I don't know the details, but I know for sure he had 1 sister and 1 brother. These are taboo subjects in my home. Can't talk about them. So I don't know the details. I know they were wiped out. One of the reasons I wasn't bar mitzvahed, I did not have a bar mitzvah. And do you know why? I mean, there are many reasons. My parents were resolute atheists.
Mm.
But one of the reasons was there was no one to invite. You see, a bar mitzvah is a big family event. The cousins, the aunts, the uncles, and so forth. Of course, the person being bar mitzvah invites his or her friends, or it's his friends. The person being bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. But the big thing, it's a family occasion. There was no one to invite. There was no one to invite because the Nazi extermination was very efficient. So the estimates are, at the end of World War II, the estimates are less than 100,000 Jews survived the Nazi Holocaust. Less than 100,000. So that means, where did all these survivors come from? Everybody claims there was a period when the Holocaust industry was in full, was very lucrative. There was a period where everybody claimed to be a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, they all claimed to be Holocaust survivors. They weren't Holocaust survivors. There was a person who...
I actually think they were, but I fear they were survivors of another Holocaust that was going on at the same time, and they may have been, in part, executing it, which is a question that Alexander Solzhenitsyn writes, which is, where did all the Bolsheviks go? And I think, and this is again a theory, while we're allowed to think, well, this is a good opportunity right now to take on the identity of people who perished and just rewrite history of ourselves as the victims. And when I saw that Nicholas Gruner story, I was like, that's so terrifying, because it's required reading coming up in schools. You have to read the story. There's tons of Holocaust people that we could be reading your books, talking about your parents and what they lived through, and they picked this man. And
look, I will get to the Elie Wiesel. I know it well. In fact, I'm not trying to promote the book. It came out 25 years ago, but I write a lot about Elie Wiesel in the book, okay? So, I remember my father, we both knew a person who had the tattoo. The only place there were tattoos were Auschwitz.
Auschwitz, yeah.
It was the only camp where they had the tattoos. And I said to my father about this person, and my father had the tattoo. I always knew the number. It was like 028128, something like that. I had memorized the number, but now I've forgotten it. I said to my father, I said, do you think he was in Auschwitz? And my father said, no. And my father was not a conspiracy person.
yeah.
No, he just said very matter-of-factly, non-judgmentally. He just said no. And I said to my father, I asked my father, so where did he get the number? And my father said, and I'm quoting him now, he said, well, after the war, some people took it off and some people put it on. But he didn't say it as a joke.
Yeah, he's just
my
like, this
father
is,
was,
the incentive here is to have one.
Yes,
it's bad.
yes.
It's incentives. It's incentive culture, obviously. I
So,
talk about this as welfarism. If you're going to incentive bad behavior, people are going to do it.
Yes. I without going into that, because that was on a tangent, but yes. And my father said very matter-of-factly. So my mother used to get very frustrated because, even more so than my father, she could never let go of what happened to her family. She couldn't let go. And there was something that really more than grated on her when people who didn't pass through what she passed through claimed to have passed through it. And she once exclaimed in a kind of bitter irony, she said, if everybody who claims to be a Holocaust survivor actually is one, Who did Hitler kill? So everybody's claiming to be a Holocaust survivor. There are very few, a handful survived that ordeal.
Mm.
Now,
Especially particularly in Auschwitz, because there's so many were like, well, you said the tattoo.
there were there were the death camps, and then there were the concentration camp death camps. There were both work camps, and Auschwitz and Majdanek. I once spoke to the world's leading authority in the Nazi Holocaust, Raoul Hilberg, who was very kind to me. He was of your political persuasion. He was a right-wing Republican. He swore by the Wall Street Journal. I was at the other end of the spectrum, and I was a total pariah. However, don't ask me why, because I've never really understood it. He kept defending me. I was always very nervous around him. I didn't want to say anything wrong because he was kind of my savior. He was saying that what Finkelstein is writing is true. And when the 10-year battle erupted at DePaul University, he gave this very moving defense of me. And he said that I told the truth. It was at a very big price, he said. But he said, in the history of those writing about history, Finkelstein's place is secure. In any event, I once asked him, he lived in Vermont. He taught at the University of Vermont. He was very much his own person, so he could never get a job at a top university. He said very few women survived Majdanek. That's where my mother was. Very few people. So it was worse, actually. The women's section was worse than at Auschwitz. In any event, once the Holocaust industry became an industry, they were very picky about who they promoted. Now, Elie Wiesel was a fanatical supporter of Israel. He was fanatically pro anything that any American government would say. And so he became the spokesperson for the Holocaust. As to his personal history, I'm just going to give you the details as I understand them, okay? He claims he was in Auschwitz. He claimed that he was in Auschwitz. And he describes in the book Night, he describes some scenes which Raoul Hilberg, the person I mentioned to you, from the person who defended me in for reasons which still remain, except integrity, which is so rare. He was the chief historian for the Holocaust Memorial in Washington. Elie Wiesel personally picked him because Wiesel knew his stuff. And he said there were certain scenes that Wiesel describes in Night that occurred at Auschwitz. Hilberg said they could not have happened. They could not
without
have
question,
happened.
They didn't happen. You
And
read Nicholas
so
Gruner, yeah. It's like,
when Wiesel was confronted with Hilberg saying they happened, he doubled down and said they did happen. Wiesel, I knew some, not many, I knew some first-rank Holocaust historians, and they told me he was deported in 1944 from Hungary. That was one of the last deportations from Hungary. And he maybe passed through Auschwitz en route to a labor camp. That may have happened, according to the people I talked to. But there was clearly, I discuss it at some length in that little book. Wiesel figures not in a cameo role, but he has a major, he's a star of the Holocaust industry.
yeah, I mean, I I'm glad that I put Nicholas Gruner on your radar because he just knew the guy. He literally stole his identity. I mean, it's like it's a crazy.
I
He knew him
remember.
because obviously when
Yeah.
you're in a camp together, and he was like just so excited to re-meet this someone who had this experience with him and described the march, everything, and the soles of his feet, and he just was like, what he did was the real person wrote the manuscript, and this gypsy just took on his identity. And when he describes that moment of being on the plane, what am I going to say to him? Like, we haven't seen each other. And then, like, could you imagine being confronted and going, wait a second, you're not Norm Finkelstein. You're not Norm. That is, and he said, but he had cameras ready and they like shook hands. And then he even said, what's even crazier is the real Holocaust survivor spoke Hungarian.
Well, that is.
And Ely couldn't speak Hungarian at this time when this happened. And so he says to him, let's speak in English. It's just an incredible thing to comprehend that. And I think the best that I can guess is that you had these psychopaths, like, true Bolshevik psychopaths who were like, well, we can't just walk in and be like, well, I was just kind of running the Bolshevik camp over here, mass murdering Christians. So what better way to reintroduce yourself into society than to be like, I'm the ultimate victim. I survived the Auschwitz camp. I think that's what happened. I think they laundered they laundered through, and that's why there's so much confusion. And people are like, you're denying that people died here, because there's some people that are like, well, nothing ever happened, and it's like, no, something definitely. You read this guy Nicholas Gruner, and you're like, this happened. And there are some people who never lived a day in their lives of that, and I say Elie Wiesel's one of them, who took their personalities, took their identities. Full on gypsy.
I actually, regrettably, I read a lot on the Elie Wiesel case, and I tend to defer to Hilberg's judgment, and I think the judgment that there were in his so-called memoir, there were fabricated scenes is correct. However, I also believe that, when you explore any concrete situation, there are going to be things that are inexplicable. You just can't explain how or why that happened. And you have to accept that in any historical reconstruction, there are going to be inexplicable, enigmatic phenomenon. And I think in the case of the Nazi Holocaust, it's sort of like the Flat Earth Society. When you want to deny a certain phenomenon, of course, you have the right to deny it. That's as to deny a person the right to deny is what the great British philosopher John Stuart Mill called the presumption of infallibility, that you know the truth and nobody else can know the truth. No, we're fallible creatures. We're capable of error. And we always have to leave some corner of our mind open to the possibility that our deepest, most sacred beliefs, our foundational beliefs,
could be wrong.
Yep. Could be wrong. However, if you're like in the Flat Earth Society and you say the world is not round, in order to be credible, you have to respond to the mountain of evidence that's accumulated that shows the world is round. You have the right to say the earth is flat, but you also, if you're responsible, have to respond to a massive accumulation of evidence to the contrary. If you can't respond to it or don't respond to it, in my opinion, you're not entitled to be taken seriously.
Yeah, you're just a fraud.
Yeah, fine. You're just a fraud. We agree. So, my parents could be iconoclastic. They could be very bitter by the way the Nazi Holocaust has been not just misused, but weaponized to justify all sorts of things which in many places are not just deplorable, but abominations. However, in all their anger and indignation, which was transmitted to me, it never would have occurred to them to deny the horror that they endured. So when I wrote the little book, The Holocaust Industry, which caused me a lot of public grief and defamation.
Which means it's a must read. I know what that means. It's a must read.
When I wrote the book, I was always very clear from day one. I am not writing about the Nazi Holocaust. That's not what this book is about. There are many people with a vast knowledge of the subject. I have only a tiny, by comparison, a tiny amount of knowledge of the subject. This book is about how the Nazi Holocaust was, as if you can read the subtitle.
Reflections on the Exploitation of Jewish Suffering.
Yes, it's about how a horrendous event was exploited. And the exploitation now has reached the point that it makes people so angry at how it's being exploited in the cheapest, most vulgar, and also, not speaking as a person who's not religious, but sinful ways to say justifying the genocide in Gaza, that it causes people to then want to deny it ever happened. I believe we have to make the distinction. It happened, but also the way it has been manipulated, exploited, weaponized has also happened. Both of those things happened. Just like, as I discussed with people, I was on the program with Brianna Joy Gray a few days ago. I said, when you start talking about Jews and money, it very easily feeds a stereotype. However, it's also true. There's a problem here. A billionaire class of Jewish supremacists are now flagrantly, brazenly using money as a blackmail weapon to silence not just criticism of Jews, but silence criticism of an ongoing genocide as we speak. And we have to address that also. Now, it's very hard to address it without feeding the stereotype.
But I think and that's why it's so important for me to constantly be addressing Jewish Americans, because something that they're very good at doing is pretending that there's no differences. Like that's identity politics. Like you're Jewish, therefore this is your history. Therefore this is how you should be responding to this. And that gives them so much power. So it's very important to study the Bolsheviks, right? Because that means at the same time you had Jewish people who were suffering actually and legitimately, and you had Jewish psychopaths, okay, who were mass murdering, Henryk Yagoda, okay, mass murdering Christians. The same thing is happening right now, okay? You have literal psychopaths, and I would describe them as Zionists, okay? Zionist psychopaths who are happy to oversee the slaughter of children. Some people who I think actually look happy when you talk about it. It's so disturbing spiritually to see people who can joke about suffering and things of that nature. And then you have people who are dealing with the kickback of those people who don't have platforms, who are being treated as if, and it's because everybody around the world needs to understand it is possible for you can be any identity and to have multiple things going on at once. And I truly believe that the Zionist ideology is an evil. This idea that it's an evil because it's a supremacist ideology that says you can trample over anybody's rights as long as it is like, you serve Israel. And that's what I have seen in my experience, is that even people who I thought were fundamentally good, when it came down to it, turned into and celebrated the death of children because those children were Palestinian and were not Israeli. And it's shocking. It still continues to shock me to recognize that.
I want to just say a couple of things. Candace, you don't know me from a hole in the wall, and I barely know you. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
I'm not a web person. I've said that. I am from the left tradition. You are from
the right.
The right. And my reading of, say, Russian history is going to be radically different than your own. And I have to say that because there'll be people who, after watching this, say, why didn't Finkelstein say that he is actually a supporter of Lenin and Trotsky and all those people?
Are you a Trotskyite?
Right. I wasn't a Trotskyist, but I was certainly within that trajectory, for sure. And I still am. I'm an old man, but I still am. But having said that, and setting the record straight, I think you are correct that there are aspects of what's going on now that are just hugely ugly. Take a simple example. You use a computer, right? And sometimes, I don't know nowadays with computers, but sometimes you can work on something for 3 hours. You remember the day, and then you can lose everything. You press the wrong key, everything is gone. Now they have backups and backups, but I don't know how to use them, so I lose whenever. Okay. And then you lose something that you worked on for 3 hours. Okay? And you think it's the end of the world. Oh my God. Oh my God. I worked on it for 3 hours. Oh my God. You lose 3 hours worth of information, or work and information. And then you're in Gaza. This is not being done behind the scenes. These are Israeli soldiers posting on the social media their ecstasy and their euphoria when they blow up Palestinian homes. Not 3 hours on your computer. Your whole life is vaporized. And they're thrilled. They're thrilled. They have what's called in Gaza controlled demolitions.
Everything has happened since October 7th has been a controlled demolition.
I agree with you. Everything has been with intent, to use the words of the 1948 Genocide Convention. It's intent to destroy a people. Okay? Just one step further. They go into neighborhoods where there's no Hamas, there's no nothing. And they just calmly rope off the area and then detonate whole neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Now,
because they're going to turn it into a beach town.
Well, they said over and over again.
Jared Kushner's on camera saying it.
Yeah, we're going to make Gaza, they said over and over again, we're going to make Gaza unlivable. So you'll have two choices, to stay and starve or to leave. That's why all this talk now about the Trump plan is so silly. There's nothing there. Do you know 95% of the homes, 95, have been vaporized?
I thought that it was 85, so it's up to 95.
It was 92% before the assaults on Rafah and Gaza City. So now it's about 95%. There is 50 million tons of rubble. The main agencies, UN and international humanitarian agencies, they say that it'll take until the year 2050 to clear away the rubble, because the rubble is mixed in with all of these toxic substances like asbestos and also unexploded ordnance. So everyone says, well, Netanyahu didn't achieve his goal. Actually, he did
Yes, he
achieve
did.
his
Of
goal.
course he did. I mean,
he said we will make Gaza unlivable.
Raise
Either stay and starve or leave. He achieved his fundamental goal. Now, he was hoping for a stampede of them leaving or incentivized to leave by the relentless bombing and artillery firing. But now they'll leave in a trickle because there's nothing to go back to. There's nothing there. It's been pulverized. So,
one of the things I want to say that I found to be especially dark about the Gaza situation.
No, I just wanted to complete the thought. So, what you're saying when you say that they're actually happy about it, that's not a speculative pronouncement by you. They posted it, and they still do. They post it on their social media, what they're doing as they do it. That's a fact. You can't get it. When you read a lot of the human rights reports and the reports by genocide experts, a lot of, what their evidence is? They're citing the social media, what the Israelis post.
It's really dark. The videos.
It's very dark.
It's very dark. And you see something in their eyes. That's what I always say. Like, the eyes are the window to the soul. There is that's what I say. It's a demonic force that rules that nothing, I don't care who the child was. If I saw a child suffering, I have a natural spiritual response to that. I don't care if that child is Arab, Jewish, black, white, it doesn't matter. They don't have that. Instead, it's like, and you see it even in the commentators or Zionists. It's like they're trying not to crack a smile and a joke about how many of these kids have been killed. It's really disturbing, but I have to see God in this, which is just to say that what is happening in Gaza has awakened the world. And America is the best evidence of that because we were the most asleep. And we were like zombies on the Israel issue. Yeah, of course we support Israel. It's the size of New Jersey. Why can't, all the talking points. And there has been this sort of radical reaction. And so that tells us that people, when they are armed with facts and knowledge, are fundamentally good. They're fundamentally good. And we're fighting back. And it's hard. And there are people that are selling out. But I think truth is winning.
I believe truth is winning. And we have to, I think, credit it to two reasons. One is a horrible reason to credit. Israel is conducting a genocide in broad daylight.
Right.
It was very hard to conceal. But number two, it was because a large number of media outlets, in particular on the web, were out of control. And now there is a retrenchment, an attempt to control TikTok, control CBS News, control CNN. They're trying to now methodically gain control again of, as the expression has it, gain control of the narrative. And there's a real problem on our college campuses right now. There are students, professors, in fact, tenured professors, are terrified of saying anything supportive of the Palestinians or critical of Israel. You remember in the spring of 2024, there were all the encampments. And you know what? A whole academic year passed without anything. It was like this eerie silence had descended on the college campuses because the students were terrified. And so the media, academia, they're trying to regain control right now. And so I believe that people have, in particular on the college campuses, have to find, like you said earlier, it takes a lot of courage. there were a lot of students who were suspended because of the encampments. They weren't allowed to attend graduation because of the encampments. And then if you were foreign students, you were rounded up because of the encampment. It does require courage.
But I also want to remind people, when you think that requires courage, is imagine being someone in Gaza right now.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's such a small price to pay, in my opinion. And was it scary? Yeah, I'm not going to pretend like last year was easy for me and my family. But me and my husband were so committed to truth that we were just like, whatever comes, whatever cost comes. You are now in that challenge, and people say, what would you have done? We are finding out right now what people would have done when faced with a genocide. Do you turn the other way? Do you accept the money? Do you continue to be a part of the apparatus of the academia, which lies routinely? That's why I say people should read Thomas Sowell, and he will tell you that every bad idea comes from academia. It comes from the cult of academia. They will always publish the books and lie about what's happening, and it's because actually it's always been controlled. So we're trying to achieve academics when in reality it's a small club, and you got to have the right perspectives if you want to stay in it. No matter how accomplished or if you're brighter. And I really challenge people to recognize that. So you are talking about maybe losing, money.
For a young person, I try to be sympathetic. For a young person, it is a big price. No, it's not the price of Gaza. But their parents are shelling out a large amount of money.
Money can't be a ruler.
Ivy League school costs about $80,000 a year now for a student. And then if you saw places like Harvard, it wasn't just your college. They were blacklisting them at law firms, as in they said, literally, we're not talking again poetry. We are going to get a list of names of everybody in those encampments. They will never get a job at our law firm. That's what they were being told. You will never get a job.
Which is good.
Well,
I think I'm going to tell you this. I put the pressure on their parents, not on the kids. I say, if this is happening, we have to be ahead of them. So we need to establish our own law firms. If your kid got into Harvard, they're the cream of the crop. Great. The problem is that we are stepping into where they can control the entire plantation when we have what it takes to create our own stuff. We have to be innovative.
It's not for me to tell them. You see, they have the right to choose their own future, and they're being denied it. You know what they did at Harvard? These creepy organizations, they did not only have what were called doxing trucks, where they went around Harvard and they posted pictures of the students and calling them terrorists. And then,
it was crazy.
You know what else they did? You wouldn't even believe it if I told you.
I would.
They took the trucks and they went to their parents' homes.
Yeah, I did hear that, and I commented on that.
Like 500 miles away. So we have to try to step in the shoes of others.
Oh, I'm not saying they don't have a right to be traumatized by those events.
No, but I'm saying my parents, if a truck was going up and down their block saying Norman Finkelstein is a terrorist, my parents would kill me. They would kill me.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah, but I think now the point of this is that what you use my platform to say is, parents, toughen up, okay? Because the people that are doing this are psychological terrorists. That's the reason they're doing this, is to give you that embarrassment. They have the money to embarrass you. They have the money to blacklist you. But what that actually reveals is a fundamental problem in the system, that you can be punished for doing and saying the right thing. It means we've got to change it. Like I say to parents, pull your kids out of these schools. And I'm so happy that homeschooling is happening. Why do your kids want to go to Harvard, right? Well, because they say this is the best school. We'll give you all these networks. And they do. They have access, they have a network, you're more likely to get a job. But I'm saying that it's going to take us being bold for us to crash this system that says Norm Finkelstein can't be tenured, okay? But Barry Weiss can be the president of CBS. We are going to have to be the radicals. This is what I say in my platform. We have a very small window of opportunity here, right? Before they start coming for speech in America, which they're trying to do.
I believe that.
And so we have to be literally
I've said that.
I pulled my kids out of school.
I totally agree with you. There is an assault right now going on against freedom of speech, which is a real problem.
So when
And
I see
that
a kid that's being put on one of their lists,
Mhm.
like there's this account where they say anti-Semite of the week, and now they're doing like 22-year-olds. I said, hey guys, this is now Forbes 30 under 30. We should be hiring as soon as we see these kids that are being put on this list and this Harvard person did this. I'm like, can I hire her? That's my mindset, right? You have a business, that's our Forbes 30 under 30, and that's the best way to look at it.
You recognize that's a very minority mindset.
No, I don't think it is anymore. I mean, looking at the staggering rates of people, and that's why they're now trying to pass laws. People are listening. I'm telling you, we're going to be encouraged. You always have to be
I
encouraged
agree with
by
that.
the fight that they're putting up. And
Yeah.
I'm not throwing them a towel.
Yeah.
I think we're winning, and they're scared. That's why they're
Yeah,
becoming more radical.
that part I agree with.
Yeah. So we say,
That-
okay, we'll adapt. You say our kids can't go to that school. You say our kids are going to be put on lists. We're going to treat these lists as you're highlighting these students. Not the actual ones that are, radical and beating people up, but I'm saying
honestly, no.
the ones who are harmless and using their right of free speech and getting buses outside. I want to hire that kid.
They're really, look, I totally agree with you. I have looked very carefully. There were beatings going on in places like UCLA. But that's when UCLA supporters of Israel attacked the encampments. It wasn't the students. A lot of the students, they were from abroad. They recognize their limits here, and they recognize don't cross certain lines. So I was at places like MIT. They were just so decent. And a lot of the professors, the professors wanted, they were too old to sit in encampments, Woodstock is over. We're heading towards Social Security. So they sent food, so much food. There was such a festive, warm feeling there. And then when I hear John McWhorter, who teaches at Columbia, saying, oh, the poor Jewish students, they had to hear day in and day out anti-Semitism. What are you talking about? That never happened. Harvard, a 314-page report, they said the clearest example of anti-Semitism, the clearest, was a student who was who was at an encampment and got beaten up. That's what they write in the report. And then if you read in yesterday's New York Times, you know what actually happened? There was an Israeli student who came up to the encampment, and he was photographing it and videotaping it. And the folks in the encampment got nervous that they were going to be, it's the younger people's expression, I don't use it, doxing. They were afraid because of those trucks going around that he was filming them to dox them. We called in my day to blacklist them, but your generation, yours and the younger generation called it doxing. And so they held up their keffiyehs to block him from filming. And then there was some moment where he might have been tapped. He might have been tapped. One of the demonstrators said on the back of his book bag. And he did not file police charges for assault or anything like that. He did not. Then his father, who's the Israeli consul in Atlanta, he got into the picture. And then you see how everything is being orchestrated. And that became the main piece of evidence. They said he was assaulted. Somebody in the Congress said he was pushed to the ground. Never happened. And then Bill Ackman exploited, weaponized that non-incident incident to demand that Harvard close down the encampments.
It's a propagandist effort backed by a lot of money.
Yes.
Yeah. And by the way, that's exactly what happened to that. I think she was in Florida. We got to see he's wearing an IDF t-shirt. She says like F you to him. And I pushed his phone out of the face. And within hours, Pam Bondi responded. Wow, that's amazing. I could not know that you could reach the upper echelons of government. Like, I'm like, oh, a federal response to, what a puny little kid. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, you put this up there, you pretend you're a victim. We will not allow people to be. You would have thought
And how many
they tarred
times?
and feathered this kid with the response that it received from the.
How many times do you push people out of your face?
I mean, toughen up, kid.
Yeah.
It's a girl.
But yeah.
And I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying what's not okay is that they achieved a federal response within
that's
hours.
Exactly
it's
right.
completely ridiculous.
It becomes totally weaponized.
Yeah.
It becomes totally weaponized.
I want to tell you guys about home title lock because if you are a homeowner, you should listen to what can actually happen to you. The FBI has been warning homeowners about a type of real estate fraud that's on the rise, which is title theft. This type of theft doesn't happen by breaking down your doors and stealing your stuff. It happens with just a one-page document with a forged signature that can get filed at the county. Your title, which is the legal record of ownership, gets transferred out of your name. Criminals are using your ownership to then drain your equity or even sell your property. And you won't even know about it until you start getting collection or foreclosure notices in the mail. That's why I've partnered with Home Title Lock so that you can protect your equity and find out today if you're already a victim. Use my promo code Candace at HometitleLock.com and you'll get a free title history report and a free trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. That is 24/7 monitoring of any title records, urgent alerts to any changes, and if fraud occurs, their U.S.-based restoration team will spend up to $1 million to fix it for you. Again, that's HometitleLock.com and use promo code Candace, or you can just use the link below. And as always, I tell you guys about Nimi Skincare. They are my favorites because the beauty industry has been telling us for years that we need all of these complex formulas to achieve healthy skin, and that's just not true. That's why I got so interested about Nimi Skincare. Nimi is doing something that I guess is radical by building one of the most popular lines that they have around one of the most nutrient-rich, bioavailable ingredients that's on Earth, which is grass-fed beef tallow. Tallow is a traditional ancestral secret. Its composition is incredibly similar to our own skin's natural oils, which means your skin actually recognizes it. It's not a chemical coating. It's real nourishment. Nimi has 2 products from their tallow line that you should definitely know about. First, for your daily hydration, there's the Sunshine Tallow Cream. This is your go-to moisturizer. It's light, it absorbs quickly, and does not leave you with that greasy feeling. They've combined the tallow with a soothing aloe vera and a jojoba oil. It is perfect for your face and body to create a strong, resilient skin barrier against the daily grind. Then for the problem areas, they have the Buzzin' Tallow Balm. It's an ultra-rich balm that uses tallow and beeswax to create a protective barrier. It locks in moisture, it shields your skin from the elements, and it allows it to heal. This is skincare the way that it was meant to be, which is simple, pure, and powerfully effective. It's a focus on skin-loving ingredients, which is made right here in the USA, by the way. To order, go to NimiSkincare.com, explore their tallow line, and use my code Candace10 at checkout to get 10% off your order. That's NimiSkincare.com. I mean, I think we've, I do want to get to your forthcoming book because I actually don't have a copy of it, but it is coming out and it is called GAZA'S Gravediggers, An Inquiry into Corruption in High Places. Tell me what that book is about.
In my opinion, the truth about Gaza is known now. There is so much human rights material on it. About maybe already 4 months ago, South Africa, which has been prosecuting the genocide case, it submitted to the International Court of Justice a 700-page memorial, that's basically your brief, with, believe it or not, 4,000 pages of documentation.
Oh.
So I felt, when I wrote the Gaza, An Inquest into Its Martyrdom, nobody knew anything about what was going on in Gaza. I sat down and I read through all the human rights reports, all the available information, and I tried to reconstruct the picture of what has happened to that godforsaken place. But that's not needed anymore. Like you said, most people have a general knowledge of it, and then from a scholarly academic point of view, there's such a vast amount of information available. I didn't feel I needed to repeat it. I didn't have to do what I did with the Gaza book. So instead, what I did was I looked at key figures in the international institutions people like Pramila Patten. She was head of what was called conflict-related sexual violence. They used the abbreviation CRSV, a very clunky abbreviation. And Secretary General Gutierrez of the UN Security Council, UN system, Secretary General Gutierrez, he has her go over to Israel to document sexual violence against Israelis on October 7th. And she says, she comes back, and she says there's clear and convincing evidence, or there's reasonable grounds to suppose that Hamas committed rape on October 7th. And as of course you know, and your camera people and your team know, that Israel ran with it. They ran with it. The Hamas rapists. So you look at the evidence. I look at what she has in her report. And apart from witnesses, in quotes, Israeli witnesses, there is no evidence. Now, you might say, well, it could still have happened without witnesses. Excuse me, it could still have happened without evidence. But here's the thing. Towards the end of her report, she says there's no medical evidence of rape. There is no forensic evidence of rape. And then she has this revealing tidbit. And I hope all of your listeners will process it. She says, we have 5,000 photographs from October 7th. She said, her team looked at 5,000 photographs. She said, we looked at 50 hours of digital footage. That's not a small amount. 50 hours of digital footage. They said we looked at CCTV, we looked at traffic cams, we looked at body cams, we looked at dash cams. Okay? Now, she says, not me, not you. Pramila Patten says, we saw no photographic or digital evidence of sexual violence. She didn't even limit it to rape. She said we saw no direct photographic or digital evidence of rape. But did that stop her from concluding we have reasonable evidence? We have clear and convincing evidence? There was no evidence.
It was money.
It was whether it was money. I honestly can't say in her particular.
It's a guess for me that usually when somebody comes to a conclusion like that, there's a fellowship. There's just something there that you'll find. But
then I'm not disputing that. I say as a factual thing, I can prove it. Okay. I'm not saying it's not true what you said.
I'm guessing, and I don't know it's true.
Yeah. But then, as you know, Israel ran with it. And you know why they ran with it? Israelis did not need the incentive of rape to commit genocide in Gaza. They ran with it for here because of our own history. They knew it would resonate here because of our own history of slavery and the lynchings and so forth.
That was also behind the babies were put in ovens, which got debunked. The idea here is actually what you're trying to exploit is Jewish American emotion when you hear the concept of ovens at all. And so that's very
I never
clear.
Thought of that, but
and he did get caught, by the way, that he did specifically share, and this was a part of the BB trials, which are now, I don't know what the update on that is, but that a team of propagandists moved to spread lies to the Western public. So this is exactly.
And it got weaponized here. And then another Jewish supremacist billionaire. This was Sheryl Sandberg, the former COO, Chief Operating Officer of Meta. She makes a documentary called Screams Before Silence. Now, Sheryl Sandberg, as a factual matter, you know her?
I don't know her.
Oh, I'm surprised. She's very smart.
I know who she is, but I know what she wrote, her book, and, whatever about women, lean in. Yeah.
She was the top student in her class in economics at Harvard. She's no fool. She knows evidence. There was, by their own admission, there was no evidence. There was no material evidence of rape. There was not. In fact, I think the evidence, it's not just an absence of evidence. The fact that there's no photographic or digital evidence, none. Now, if it were the case, there were only 3 pictures. But 5,000? Now, Candace, I don't know how old you are, but obviously you're several generations younger than myself. They said that the rapes, Israel said, that the rapes occurred in broad public space. Okay? And they said the witnesses were in hiding as they observed these gang rapes, they said. Now, I'm not of the younger generation, but I certainly observe the younger generation. You know, they take pictures of everything. Everything they photograph. You're walking along the street, you see a dead pigeon, out comes the iPhone. You see a bee in the air, out comes the iPhone. You're telling me not one of these witnesses thought to photograph a gang rape? They say they're in the safety of a hiding place. None. So I think rather than cast it as no evidence of rape, I think it should be cast as overwhelming evidence that there was no rape. But that doesn't stop the top student in her year in the Harvard Economics Department from making a documentary claiming there was mass rape on October 7th by Hamas. Why does she do it? It's very simple why she does it. There are the little facts, like the ones we just spoke of. The pictures, the absence of medical evidence, absence of forensic evidence. There are the little facts. And then, as you well know, there is the cause. There's the cause. And all the uncomfortable little facts, like there's no evidence, they pale in comparison to the cause. The cause is Am Israel Chai. Israel must live. They're complete supremacists. Now, I am not going to quarrel with your deep-seated belief. I will not quarrel with it. Israel must live. If that's your belief, I won't quarrel with it. But it's as if a German during World War II were making propaganda films on the pretense, and they did. They made films saying the concentration camps weren't bad. They went into some of them. They had this newsreel footage, made it look like a summer home, you know? The issue now, or I should say, the issue then, during World War II, is not whether Germany should live. At that point, the issue was the mass extermination of people. Nobody was denying Germany's right to live. What they were denying was Germany's execution of a genocide. And it's the same thing now. You could say, Am Israel Chai, Israel must live, or Israel will live, to the end of time. Fine, you could say it. And I grant you your belief. I don't happen to agree with it, but I'm not going to deny you that. I can understand that sentiment. But when that sentiment, in the midst of what's happening in Gaza now, and that part of it is, it's not just morally unacceptable. You're just a propagandist for genocide. She's no different, and I'll say it, and Ms. Sandberg, and I'm not going to deny you your achievements and your accomplishments. I will not. I recognize it's hard work. And she wasn't born rich. I've heard people who know her. She was a hard worker. It's not Barry Weiss. No, it's not. So I'm not going to deny you your achievements, but you're no different than Leni Riefenstahl. That was the famous film propagandist for Hitler. And she did a very famous, happened to be very gifted in film. She used it for the wrong purpose. She had made a famous film called Triumph of the Will, glorifying Hitler. You're no different. Okay, you're not on the scale of Leni Riefenstahl, but you're a propagandist. This is not about let Israel live. The issue is let Palestine live. That's the issue right now. And you have self-recruited yourself as a propagandist for a genocide. And by the way, Ms. Sandberg, that's just not my opinion. It's, as the most recent Washington poll showed, 40% of American Jews believe it's a genocide. You have self-recruited yourself as a propagandist for genocide, as does Mr. Van Jones. That's your job title as of now.
You know, it's something that I want to reiterate as we close here, and I want to basically direct people where they can find your book. But I have said this over and over again, and I think it's starting to register with people. If you side with evil, you should remember that evil is always an orphan. If you're finding someone that feels nothing when they kill a child, you are dealing with somebody that has a capacity for evil that you mean nothing. They won't even flinch if they have to kill you too. And this is something that I have really taken the time to explain to people. Like if you will, and that includes you, Jewish Americans, right? When we're speaking about Bibi Netanyahu, and people with that capacity for evil, there is nothing to those individuals but themselves. And you have to be very careful when you're allying with evil to realize that it will snap in 2 seconds and take you out. Evil's always an orphan.
I would just comment on that. You know, I think it cuts both ways. One of the questions that's always been asked is it possible for a person to be evil, a mass murderer, in, so to speak, one compartment of his or her life, and then be just
No.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
I agree. It's an open question, but if you ever have time, one film which very much struck me, nobody's ever heard of it, you should watch it. It's called The Music Box. And it's about a young woman, a lawyer. She lives in Chicago. Her father sacrificed everything in his life so she can get through law school.
Mm.
Okay? And the film begins, she loves her father to death. The father loves her to death. Okay? He was a wonderful father to her. And the film begins with the U.S. government presenting her father with papers that he was a mass murderer during World War II in Hungary.
Mm.
Okay? Her father asks her to defend him. I don't want to give away the ending because some people may watch it, the music box.
But it explores that theme.
And I think you will be touched and moved by how that whole story unfolds. Whether you can be a monster in one compartment of your life and a loving family member in the other. Now, I'm not saying you're wrong, because I think it is a complicated question, but it's worth pondering.
Yeah, it definitely is worth pondering. And so I want to point them in the direction, by the way, where can they get your forthcoming book? Is that out now?
No, it'll be out hopefully in January.
So in the interim, you guys, if you all of these topics that we covered today are really important. So the Holocaust industry, we all know it's happening. Finally, we were at a circumstance where the people can go backwards and understand more about how that happened. Also, Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom. If you are just starting to realize something is very wrong and you need to independently educate yourself, that is a good place to start. And lastly, I'll burn that bridge when I get to it. And these are his heretical thoughts on identity politics, cancel culture, and academic freedom. I'm sure some of this he and I disagree on and agree on. But what I will say is that one of my favorite things is that this issue is bringing people together from other sides. And that needs to happen. We need to start allying ourselves and recognize whether you view yourself on the left or the right, doesn't matter. Do you follow goodness or do you follow evil at your core? Anything that you would like to add before we get you out of here?
No, I want to say, first of all, when I was first on your program, which is about 2 years ago now, I appreciate the fact that you listened. You listened. And I was on with Jordan Peterson's daughter. I forgot her name.
Michaela Peterson.
Michaela, yeah. And she listened. You don't have to agree with me. And there are many things I said today we didn't agree on. But I respect the fact that you were a good listener. And I would also say that if you disagree with me, Mr. Shapiro, Ben Shapiro, Sam Harris, Van Jones, if you disagree with me, stop trying to, not in the case of Van Jones, but the others, come up and just talk about it. Try to be Candace Owens. Listen, and then you can respond just like she did. What's the fear? Why are you so afraid? You've received countless requests to debate me, and each and every one of them you've turned down. I sent a list, a very long list, to Piers Morgan of people they say, who would you like to debate? And all of them turned it down. I put Ben Shapiro on the list. I put Sam Harris on the list. I would be happy to debate Bill Maher, even though I believe he's a moron. I'd be happy to debate him. Defend yourself. So I believe you should have the courage of your convictions. Ms. Sandberg, let's debate it. Let's debate what happened on October 7th and whether there's any material evidence of rape. Any material evidence of rape. Let's look. Let's examine it. And I'm appreciative, even though we come from very different corners of the political universe, that you gave me the time. And I remember somebody once said to me, she's a senior historian of Nazi Holocaust. He says, in judging a person, character is much more significant than ideology. You can have nasty people across the political spectrum. Character is a much better indicator of a person than his or her ideology. And I discovered that with Raoul Hilberg. Ideologically, polar ends of the spectrum. But the guy, he came out slugging for me. And that was it was an epiphany for me. And I'm grateful that you gave me the time as well.
And I'm grateful that we were able to do this in person. And I think there's going to be so many people who challenge themselves and make sure that they have the courage of their own convictions. So you guys, so much to learn, so much to process. All of us just trying to make sure we know what we are saying and that the facts are on our side. So thank you for joining us in this discussion. We'll see you next time.